Welcome to Something Positive for Positive People. I'm Courtney Brain. Something Positive for Positive People is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that connects people who are living with herpes to mental health resources as well as community support resources and empowering education tools and all that good stuff. I can be found on Instagram at HOnMyChest, which is where I'm most active, and between the hours of 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Central Time. That's a new boundary I have to implement for myself, not because anything bad's really happened, but I now have to shift more attention to the nonprofit functions of Something Positive for Positive People rather than just the relationship and community building. So I'm always going to reply still, but if you message me outside those windows, or if you notice that we've been corresponding and I just suddenly drop off, that's why I have to begin to implement that boundary in relation to the H on my chest social media accounts and all things Something Positive for Positive People. I recently updated the website yesterday, actually, from the time of this recording, to now include different ways that you can contact me, at Something Positive for Positive People. So if you are a licensed mental health care professional, a licensed mental health care provider, so therapist or counselor, and if you're a certified yoga instructor, I want to support you and uplift you within this community, especially if you've already been through the trenches, and we can start to do virtual group sessions. I can connect you with potential clients because it's just, there's something about being connected to healing with someone who's already been through the trenches of an HSV diagnosis, as we are learning from doing these group therapy sessions and yoga classes through Something Positive for Positive People. So these are all donation based. If you can join, if you can pay, please do. But for the most part, I just pay based on, I'll pay whatever it is that we have in the account I'll use to pay. Or if I need to throw extra to pay the instructor or the counselor, then I go ahead and do that. So if you can give, please do. And it helps those who absolutely cannot. And we always have a conversation about that. If they are, or they try to avoid a conversation, then I let them know. I kind of fill that out. And then I am able to bring people into these spaces for themselves. Any announcements? No. Oh, the rest of the website. I started rambling. So you can also reach out to me through there. There's a drop down menu on the contact page. If you are a media outlet, if you're a podcaster and you want to interview me on your podcast, or if you're someone who wants to be on this podcast, or if you want to write in to the blog Something Positive from Positive People, that's been getting a lot of headway because people are maybe not at a place where they're ready to talk about their diagnosis or their experiences, but they're definitely at a place where they can write about their diagnosis and their experiences. So that's simply just a space for people to be able to write it out and get their story out there to support people in the safest way that they feel possible. That should be everything. Not missing anything. Oh, you can always donate. Go to www.spfpp.org, and on the homepage you'll see options to donate. All right, today our guest is Bliss. Bliss, I gotta ask you, what's you got like, it's Black History Month, and I'm assuming that what do you call it? The paint? Is it paint?
It's like tribal face paint.
Okay.
More or less. But I incorporate the Black Liberation flag for more of like an African American feel to it.
Okay.
So yeah, I do it every day during Black History Month. It's like a conversational starter, and I just have fun with it.
Yeah, it's definitely a conversation starter. All right. What do you like go out and do things? Because it looked like you got on regular clothes, but then you have the tribal paint.
Well, I work at a school, so I wear it to the school, whatever, and the kids will usually ask me about it, or my coworkers, and I wear it in public. It's nothing really to do. It's just something I do because I kind of feel like with our history in this country, had we not been stripped of our traditions in the beginning, this would be like a norm, more or less.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we would. I don't know.
How old are
the thought that I had.
How old are the kids that you work with?
This middle school age.
Are there white kids there?
Yeah.
Do they ask if they can do it too?
No, I've only had one student actually want to have their face painted, and I painted it for them, and it was a Black student.
Okay. I was just curious.
Like what the colors mean and stuff.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, what would that look like if, a white kid asked.
I wouldn't have a problem doing it on a white student.
I can't imagine if they went home to their parents, if their parents was Trump supporters or something like that. You're like, what the?
Oh my god! Where's the Italian face? Try to make up, mom.
All right, so let's get into it. So obviously we've been talking long enough for people to realize by now that you're a black woman. What are your pronouns? I've not asked that in the last 50-ish episodes.
She, her.
Okay. I hate to assume. And then how old are you?
I'm 27.
Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get right into it. So you reached out to me. At first, let's start there. I want to know what encouraged you to reach out to me. You emailed me, you had a well thought out email, and you wanted to share your experience, not just with HSV, but also in relation to your mental health experiences that you've had as well.
Well, I guess you could start off with the HSV diagnosis, just trying to find information in like places where I can, because I relate better to like people's stories and experiences. And so just listening to your podcast, I came across it on Apple Podcasts. And just listening to other people's stories and then knowing outside of HSV that I wanted to share my story, but I've always felt like I've had to be censored in, because I'm a Christian, so like when you're testifying or whatever at church, you can't just be like,
oh, this about to be good.
Details. So it's like, I've told bits of my story, but like chunks of it have been left out because I just didn't feel like it was welcomed in the environment that I was always sharing it. And so just hearing you always putting out that invitation for people to share their stories, I was like, well, I guess it's an opportunity to just see where this goes. And I just reached out to you and just kind of thought, well, I don't know how this process works, so I guess I'll just type the whole story out and see what he does with it. So, yeah.
All right, let's go. The floor is yours. I'll ask questions when you get to a stopping point, or if you see a look on my face and you want to elaborate more on something. So I'll leave you the floor.
Well, where do you want me to start?
I want you to start. So let's start at the diagnosis. I usually have people start there. You know, what was happening? What with your symptoms? What was your relationship to the partner who might have exposed you, and how were you delivered your diagnosis, and then next steps from there.
Okay, well, that's a bit of an interesting story. So back in July of 2020, I was living with my parents, and at the time it was on lockdown. And so with the school that I was working at, the kids wasn't attending school, so I was at home. And all I knew was it was a Sunday night, and I was working on this paper for school, and I started feeling like a headache coming on, and then I didn't feel so well, and so I laid down, and I started to get a fever. And so my mom had came in, and she checked my temperature, and I had a fever, and so they were worried because they thought, oh my God, she has COVID. And so I called the advice nurse and made an appointment to get tested for COVID or whatever, and it just kind of started there. The next day, I still had like a fever, and it just kind of like flu-ish symptoms. I was really fatigued. It just did not feel good at all. By the third day, I had chills. The temperature wasn't there so much, just really fatigued. And then I started to notice that I had like this discharge kind of coming out, and it was like horrendously smelling. And I was like, what is going on? Like, I don't understand. And so I called the advice nurse back again, and I was explaining my symptoms, and they were like, oh, it's fine. When's your COVID test? And I was like, it's on this date. So it was like, okay, call us back if your symptoms get worse. And so by day 4, I had noticed there was this discomfort in my genital region, and so I had looked, and I noticed bumps. And so I was like, well, that's weird. And so I started Googling everything, and it was between what Google pretty much spit back out to me was between herpes or trich. And so I called the advice nurse back. I told them what my symptoms was, and let me back up. I actually went another day, and the bumps actually opened up into blisters, so it became worse and painful. So I was like, oh no, I need to call the advice nurse because Google ain't getting it. And so I called the advice nurse, and they was like, oh, well, you need to go to the emergency room because it sounds like you could be having a herpes outbreak. So I was like, oh my God. And I was like, want me to go nowhere because, the COVID and stuff. And I had taken my COVID test, but, they just didn't want me going anywhere. And they kind of quarantined me in the house just in case. And so I just told my mom this story. I was like, yeah, I'm not feeling too well. And I called the advice nurse. And they told me that I should go into the hospital. And so, but I'll keep you posted. So she was like, okay. So I went to the emergency room. And I explained to them what was going on and stuff. They asked me about how long, and I told them like a few days or whatever. And they sent me back into the back room, and the examiner came in. He starts asking me questions about like my sexual history and all that kind of stuff. When the last time I had sex and all that kind of stuff. Mind you, the last time I had sex at this point was a week prior, and this might seem like a lot of information, but it was actually the first time that my partner had actually came in me. So that'll make more sense later. But so I started talking about all of that, and they did the.
Are you pregnant?
Nah.
Oh, all right.
That's a whole nother issue, but no, I'm not pregnant. But they looked or whatever, and he was like, oh, that looks like herpes. And I was like, oh my God. He was like, we're going to test it, but we're going to have to do a whole, like, not procedure, that's not the word I want to use, like the
a
whole
swab
process where, you go into the vagina and crank it open and stuff, which was really traumatizing, honestly, because it was just so painful and uncomfortable down there. And then they stick this probe in you, and then they crack you open, and then it's like, and so the nurse who was observing him, she had it.
Real quick. So I just cringed at all of that. And the way that you just explained it, no, don't be. The way you explained it, like, I bitch about having had a Q-tip stuck down my dick hole, but you're talking about like a whole device that's being like put in there and cranked up and moved around and all that stuff. And it just made me laugh. I was like, damn, you know what? I sound so whack for that. Now that I'm thinking about it, I'm complaining about a Q-tip. You got this whole like concoction that you describing.
Yeah, it was a lot. Like, I've had a pap smear before, and so like, it was cool because there was no discomfort. But with it already being so painful, and then they, like I said, put this thing in you, and then they crank it open, and it's like, oh my God. And so the lady nurse or whatever, she was standing there, and she could tell that I was like tensioning up because it hurt so much. And so she just had to tell me, like, okay, you're going to have to relax because otherwise I guess I could do more damage. And so I was like, okay. So I was trying to breathe through it, and he collected the swabs, and they did like a mucus swab or whatever, and they like did the whole panel on me. And so they gave me a shot, and they gave me some antibiotics and some other pills, and said that just as a precautionary measure, and was like, we'll call you with your results, if anything, in a few days. So I was like, okay. So I, naturally my mom wanted to know, like, what they said, and so I didn't want her to know, like, all of all the other stuff. So I just said, oh, they gave me some antibiotics and told me to just wait for my COVID test or whatever, but they think that it's like an infection or something. So she was like, okay. And so I had called my partner, who was actually my boyfriend at the time, and I told him everything that was going on and stuff, and he was confused and concerned at the same time because as far as he knew and I knew, he was clear. And so he just didn't know what was going on, and I didn't either. And so it was about, I think, it was either the next day or like 2 days later, they called me and actually told me that I had trich, and that I had to, basically it's a parasite. You have trich, and you have to take these antibiotics, and make sure your partner takes the antibiotics too, so that you guys can be clear and abstain from sex for 2 weeks. So I had told my boyfriend, and he was like, what? And so, like, he wasn't like blaming me, but he was shocked because he knew he was clear. So he made an appointment with his doctor, and I told him what he needed to be tested for, and and I told him that he needed to get the antibiotics to take to clear it up. So he goes and he gets tested, and when he gets his results back, his labs, he sent me a text message of his results, and his results came back clear. So now I'm confused because at this point in time, I hadn't had sex with anybody else in over like 2 years, besides him. And so I'm like, nah, something's not right. This is not making sense. So now I'm all paranoid, and so I called my doctor back, and I asked them to give me more information about trich. And so the doctor calls me, and he's talking to me about trich, and basically what he says is there's no test for men. Usually men will have trich and won't know it until their female partners have symptoms, and then basically the female partner is told, okay, you take these antibiotics, and then you tell your partner to take these antibiotics. You both get cleared, you wait for 2 weeks, and then you can have at it. So I'm like, oh my goodness. So while we're having this conversation, he then casually says, oh yeah, by the way, you tested positive for HSV1. So I'm like, okay. So I'm thinking, well, you know, what exactly is that? Because he said HSV. I had never heard of it called HSV. I've always known, herpes to be herpes. So he says it's basically oral herpes, and your test came back positive for HSV. So in my mind, I'm thinking, well, that's like what my mom had. When I was younger, I was with my mom at a doctor's appointment, and the doctor told her that she had herpes. And so she starts freaking out, and the doctor's like, no, it's not the STD or herpes, it's oral herpes. And he basically tells her, I can't remember all that he told her, but I just know he calmed her nerves by telling her that it wasn't the STD type of herpes. It's like a totally different kind of herpes. And I just know that my mom would sometimes have these breakouts on her mouth when we were younger, and she would blame it on dusting. She would say that, because my mom was an avid cleaner. She said, oh, I was dusting and I broke out. And I just know, just being a kid, that she wouldn't kiss us when she had these breakouts from dusting. And so I carried this mentality about it as an adult. So I'm thinking, oh, okay. So I told the doctor, I said, well, my mom had that, it's okay, cool. I'm thinking that it just came up from the blood draw that they did, and it was no big deal. I didn't think there was no connection between like an STD or any kind of thing I could transmit. I just didn't know. So when I talked to my boyfriend later that day, I told him, I said, well, my doctor said there's no test for trich for men. So I don't know why your doctor didn't tell you that, but there is no test. There's no way to tell if you had it. But if you want to continue, basically to do this, we're both going to have to take the antibiotics to get it clear. We can't have sex for 2 weeks. So, but I didn't even mention the HSV because I thought it was irrelevant. I didn't think it was relevant at all. So time goes by, whatever, and now we're in November, and it's Thanksgiving, and he came up to my apartment, because now at this time I don't live with my parents anymore. I have my own place, and he came over, whatever, and we ended up having sex, and we had anal sex for the first time. And so it was cool. Everything went smooth as far as I was concerned or whatever, and that was that. But the next day, I was experiencing like this discomfort. So I'm thinking, oh, well, it's probably because it was my first time, having anal sex, whatever. I just kind of wrote it off. So a couple more days went by, and it went from just slight discomfort to itching. And I was just kind of like, okay, I'm not tripping. Like, I'm thinking it's still because of, I didn't know much about anal sex. So I'm thinking, oh, it's just because we had anal sex a couple days ago, whatever. I don't know. So then it started to hurt when I went to the bathroom, and I was like, okay, let me look. So I looked, and I saw the same kind of sores like from before. So I was like, what the hell is this? I looked into HSV1, and it kept coming up as oral herpes. Because I'm thinking at this point, well, this is the same source from before. We both took the antibiotics. I'm pretty confident that my partner is faithful. I'm not sleeping with anybody else.
I thought you was about to say, I'm not faithful.
Nah. So I'm like, something else is going on here. And so I decided to make a doctor's appointment, and I told my partner, I said, look, I have an outbreak, on my ass or whatever. And he knew what we had done not that long ago, so he was like, what? And I was like, yeah, and it looks the same as like what was going on before. So he's confused, I'm confused, and I make another doctor's appointment. This time it's with a regular physician, or no, a regular gynecologist, like it's just a regular in-person appointment, not the emergency room. So I go in or whatever, and it's important to note that this particular gynecologist was not my normal gynecologist. She was out, and so I scheduled it with whoever could take me as soon as possible. So I just ended up with this guy, and they start looking at my chart, and he says, well, you tested positive for herpes in July. And so I was like, well, I don't understand. Like, what do you mean? Because what the guy described on the phone back then in July was just, he said that it was oral herpes. But from my memories of the kid, that's not the same as, like, genital herpes. So I'm not understanding. So he said, well, let me take a look and see what's going on or whatever. So, he did the exam, and he said, oh, I'm sorry, my love, but that looks like herpes. And I'm just like, oh, my God, I cannot right now. So he decided to take a swab, and he ran the full panel on me. And I told my boyfriend after the appointment that he needed to come over to my house, and we needed to talk. So he agreed or whatever, and this was like a couple of hours before he was due to come to my house because he had to work. And so I ended up going to the store, and I just bought some Patron and decided to just get drunk. And because I was just devastated, I was like, I'm done right now, because it was pretty much coming out to the conclusion that I had herpes. But we wasn't like for sure until I get my labs, even though he's saying the swab that they took in July came back as herpes, not my blood. So I get drunk or whatever, and my boyfriend comes over, and he could tell I've been drinking, but he knew I wanted to talk. And we go in my room, and I sit down, and we start talking about it, and I just told him everything. I just said, look, this is what the doctor said, and they're saying that basically I tested positive for herpes as well back in July, but they did another swab just to make sure that's what it is. And so he was just like, wow. And but we had this conversation before we started having sex. Have you been tested? Yeah, he got tested after his last partner. I've always gotten tested after all of my partners. So it was just really an unfortunate situation. We found ourselves both in a confusing and unfortunate situation because we just didn't understand what was going on. And then finally my results came back, and I tested positive for HSV1 from the swab and negative for HSV2. So then from that point, they had gave me, I don't even know the name of my medication.
Valcyclovir?
Cyclovir, yeah. The one that starts with the A.
Okay.
Cyclovir. Yeah, I was given that, and I was told to take that 3 times a day until it was gone, which I think was like 7 days or something like that. And to fill the prescription again and just take it as needed, like if I had another outbreak, to start taking it again, and to abstain from sex for 2 weeks. And so I texted my boyfriend the results, and I told him that he might want to get tested. And I also want to back up and say that when I was in that appointment with the gynecologist, I had asked them when the last time I was tested for HSV, because I was trying to get a timeline together, like, okay, well, if I tested negative back here, then I know I didn't get it from such and such partners. I had to have gotten it from my boyfriend. Come to find out, all the times I got STD tested and told them, test me for everything, never tested me for HSV. Never tested me. Oh, I was so upset. Because my thing is, it's like, when somebody says everything. That means all. Last I checked, all means all. Like, that don't mean leave nothing out. And so when they left that out, I was upset because it's like, well, here it is now. I can't even definitively say if I got it from my boyfriend. If he turns up positive, did he get it from me? We don't know. Neither one of us knows. And so, fast forward to now, whatever. My partner eventually goes and makes his doctor's appointment. He gets tested, and then he gets his results, and it was the same. He had HSV1, but tested negative for HSV2. But he's asymptomatic. He's never had outbreak anywhere. To his knowledge, anyway. So, and same thing with him. All the times he got tested, he had never been tested for HSV. So neither one of us knows where it came from or what happened. But just in slightly educating myself, the doctor said that it could have came from oral sex. So it's something that either one of us could have picked up as kids. We didn't really play the blame game. It's not like, oh my God, you gave me herpes or nothing. We just kind of took it what it was, and we just pressed forward from there.
That sounds like a full circle, just positive interaction, like in navigating discussions when issues come up with STIs with a partner that you have. So the way that you were just able to communicate, you felt safe communicating with your partner. It sounds like y'all having a really healthy relationship.
Yeah, we do. I'm not gonna lie, when the second outbreak happened, I didn't know what to say because I was like, well, this is getting ridiculous. I don't understand. And I was actually not gonna say anything. I was gonna just go to my doctor's appointment, get all the answers, and then bring it up. But I was like, no, something could be wrong, and I just decided to tell him, and everything I've told him, he's always received it very well, and we have a good communicative relationship.
Yeah, that's positive. Like, a lot of people are deathly afraid of having to communicate this to their partners, partly because maybe they are afraid of the response being left or abuse, or just having their partner blame them for having given it to them. And it sounds like, you went into it very objectively, like, let's figure out what happened. I'm going to give you the information. And then you allowed for him to receive the information and take the next steps, and then y'all were exchanging the information. So, yeah, shout out to y'all. That's a healthy-ass interaction and way of dealing with not only a genital herpes outbreak and then trich, and then learning about that, going through the education process, but to also have it revisited from anal sex, and then have to have a whole nother conversation, and y'all only been with each other, right? So to be able to do that, to be able to have that poise and be able to discuss that, like, that's a major takeaway from your experience, your story. I'm very disappointed in the medical professionals that you've dealt with, because they just said, oh, that's oral herpes, and they're looking at your genitals. Why wasn't this explained to you that HSV1 transmits genitally, and it's primarily oral herpes? It presents as oral herpes primarily. It's not just oral herpes, right? And then type 2 is not just genital herpes. You can test positive for either of these and then have presentations of the virus in either location, and you've learned that now. But the path of looking and figuring out that information didn't come as easy as it should for you.
Yeah, like, it wasn't until the gynecologist I was sitting down with, he explained that through oral sex, or I guess through things like oral sex or whatever, it could be transmitted from oral to a genital, and he explained that whole thing. But that initial guy, that's why I didn't put two and together at all. And then him not knowing that I was there with my mom when she got it, that doctor told her, oh, it's not STD herpes, because she was freaking out, and I'm 27. I was probably maybe in middle school, or maybe a little younger than that when that happened, And so you just think about time and how information has changed over time, and how medical professionals haven't. We know it's traditionally as oral herpes, right? And so then go ahead.
I was going to ask you, so you went and saw the same doctor your mom saw?
No.
Oh, okay, all right. That's how I heard it. All right, keep going. I'm sorry.
Sorry. No, it's okay. No, I'm just saying, like, that doctor says to my mom, well, you have herpes. My mom's freaking out. He's like, well, wait. It's not the STD herpes. It's just, it's oral herpes. And then my mom didn't help because then she would say stuff like, oh, well, because now I know it's called a breakout. As an adult, I know it's called a breakout, right? But as a kid, oh, mom got that stuff on her mouth from dusting. From dusting. So, you carry that as an adult, and it just goes to show you how misinformation can carry with you from childhood to adulthood. And then you find yourself in a situation where you got to figure things out, and you're going based off what you learned as a kid.
We make up some wild shit, don't we? we make up the wildest shit. Oh my goodness! I'm thinking back to it.
For a fact, if I came to my mama right now and said, "Mama, don't you got herpes?" Hell no, I ain't got no herpes. What are you talking about? That's what my mama responds. I know it would be. Mm-hmm. And it just goes to show you. It's sad.
Yeah. Yeah, the way that, like I said, the way that you handled everything seems to be the healthiest way possible. Like, this is a cookie cutter example of how to navigate, and you're in a monogamous relationship. And also, hold on, I'm completely neglecting the fact that this all happened in 2020, right?
Yes.
All right, so diagnosed in July, but just kind of like dismissed because that's oral herpes. I got a blood test done, so it's in my blood, and since it's oral herpes, nothing in the genital region is affected. That would be my thought process if I'm hearing this from a doctor. Go on about your business, try anal sex for the first time, and then bam, outbreak, find another healthcare provider, and they tell you, oh, this is actually how herpes works. And this was in around Thanksgiving, right? That this
it was November. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so November that happened. December, January.
Sex on Thanksgiving, but like the whole conversation happened in November.
Okay, so this brings up a really good question. You're in a relationship, your partner is okay with it, accepting, y'all exchange healthy dialogue. Why pursue any resources at that point? Like, what made you find something positive for positive people, and then get to the point where you were like, you know what, I want to do something, I want to contribute, I want to share, I want to help. Like, how did you find the podcast? I know you said that you found it on Apple Podcasts, but what made you look for anything if you didn't need anything at that point?
Well, I can't say that I didn't need anything, because even though my partner and I handled it well, it was still a hard pill to swallow. And so with me, because I have other health conditions or whatever, and I just like to be as educated as possible about anything that's going on with me and my body. And so it started off as me trying to find information, and I had actually come across this other podcast called Positively Positive. Oh, she's so awesome.
Oh, you hear that, Sarah? You hear that? You got a shout out. Free shout out.
Basically, her podcast was more of the educational. She just gets down to the nitty gritty. Look, this is what an outbreak looks like. This is how you can treat an outbreak. Here's my experience telling friends and family and all that kind of stuff. And so that's how I got started. So once I kind of got my information from her, I was just kind of on this binge for information. So I started looking for other podcasts. And so I literally just put in the search engine on Apple Podcasts, herpes, and oh no, wait, let me back up. There was a YouTuber. It was actually a YouTuber that had you on her.
Oh, Laureen HD.
Not her. I've seen hers. It was
Alexandra Harbushka. Shouting out everybody today. Who else we need to let know? Who else we need to let people know about?
So I had seen you on hers, and then I remembered that I think you had mentioned your podcast on there, but I hadn't searched for your podcast. And then so fast forward, I'm searching on Apple Podcasts, and then your podcast came up, and so I was like, oh yeah, that's dude from the YouTube channel. Let me check it out. And so I started listening to your podcast, and just hearing the people's stories and experiences were really helpful to me. And then, like I said, just you putting out that invitation for people to kind of share their stories, and then you also sharing your experiences with trying to find guests and certain guests would either cancel on you, or they would be, their priorities would be in the wrong place, like how many viewers and all that kind of stuff. Just remembering you talking about all that, and then just evaluating myself and knowing that I've always had this story I've wanted to tell. Now HSV is just another niche in my story. Why not reach out and see if I can just tell my story on this platform?
Damn. So you heard me. You heard me bitching. You answered the call.
I mean, but no, that honestly, you talking about that is what made me feel comfortable knowing that you were doing this for all the right reasons. It's like, how do I say this? Like, you were, I don't know if you were upset, but I guess disappointed. You were disappointed when people would say things to you like, how many people are listening to your podcast? And then, like, you're just kind of like, well, that's not really what this is about. Or they would reject coming onto your show because you didn't have such amount of viewers or whatever. And so that let me know that you're more about helping people. It doesn't matter how many people are listening. Do you want to tell your story to help others or not? And so I think that's something, I just decided that's something that I want to be a part of.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. And that was the intention behind it. Like, I didn't want to shit on nobody. I didn't have to say names, but like it happens to me, and it's happened far more times than I'm comfortable with. So I just said, fuck it. I'm not reaching out to anybody anymore. So if people are like, you should interview this person. All right, go ahead, tell them they should be on the podcast, and we'll see what happens from there. And I just leave it at that. But I want the everyday people who are having these experiences and just bring them all into one place. Like, the information, the people are scattered all over the fucking place. I can tell you of a dozen different herpes support groups that all do the same thing, that are run by different people because people are petty and don't get along with each other for just basic ass reasons. Like, someone gets into it, they're like, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna go start my own. And this is timely because I just made a story post today asking people about their experiences with the secret or private support groups that are, not even really support groups. So there are so many of these out there that if they were to just come together, if people were to just be like, hey, this is available if you need it, and people were to just like let that catch on and share, then it would probably be a group for people who don't have herpes, because I think that should be more common. Like, hey, do you not have herpes? Come join my group. At this point, with as much shit as I've seen. And then it also speaks to just how people are, because when people get power, they do shit with it. And I'm over the stuff that I've seen, because as soon as I got exposed to like the politics of herpes support groups, I got the fuck out of there. Like, and at that point, it was just like, go, I'm gonna just make my own shit. This ain't doing nothing for me. This ain't doing nothing for anybody. Like, this is just a perpetual cycle of stigmatization. People can come in and they can vent and bitch about their experiences, perfectly valid, and then have more perpetual negativity. But if I come in and I say, hey, there's these social media accounts, the people who are in charge of these support groups will delete that post. They'll mark it as spam, because I also started the podcast and I was looking for podcast guests. What better place to go for podcast guests than in a herpes group if your podcast is about interviewing people with herpes? So they even made that a pain in the ass for me. Not a pain in the ass like you had, obviously, but like more difficult than it needed to be. So yeah, I'm glad that it happened, because things had to happen the way that they did in order for everything to be where it is now. But I'm over the obstacles, so I'm putting the call out there. If people want to support, if people want to put themselves out there in a safe, comfortable way, you can write, or I can interview you. And like how you're interviewing with me right now, we're on live, and I'm talking into this podcast, we're recording stuff. No one knows who you are, but they know your story. And I think that's probably what's more important than anything else. Like, I'm not planning on getting rich off herpes. I plan on helping a lot of people, through herpes, because this is how people typically find me. And in finding me through herpes, it goes back to the core of what this really is, which is a mental health resource. It's a suicide prevention resource. And like, people call me a sex educator and all this other shit, a herpes advocate, which I hate. Don't ever call me a herpes advocate. if anything, if there's anything you'll say, please say herpes education advocate or STI education advocate, something along those lines. I am not advocating for people to get herpes because that's what that sounds like to me. So, all of that said, like, it's a suicide prevention resource. I am working as a journalist investigating a topic. I've been doing this shit for 4 years. Just so happened to have gotten nonprofit status out of this so that people who want to get involved with this can get involved. And it's a more safe way to do so. And it's something that, along the way, we don't have a cure. There is not a cure that's in the near future right now. And even if we have one, that's not going to negate the mental health impacts of STI stigma. It's not going to go away. It'll just look different. Like, we're stigmatized with the virus. We stigmatize ourselves with the virus in these groups, and we do that in our own support spaces. We do it in the waking moments of life. People stigmatize us as people who are carrying the herpes virus, and the list goes on. The shit ain't going nowhere. So all we can do is learn how to live with it through therapy, through support, through community, and working with one another. So these investigations that I'm doing, like, that's what the solution seems to be, and it's a perpetual one. So as people begin to find these resources and get connected to the healing of the self-stigmatization, I think that that's probably going to be the best thing we can do. But it's just going to take for every individual who finds it to be willing to step into that space of healing. And tying all of that in with being about mental health and suicide prevention, we can now talk about your mental health and what you were trying to share with me that you wanted to speak on.
As far as my mental health is concerned, I've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder with mixed episodes. Basically what that is you can experience manic episodes, which is like bouts of excitement or euphoric excitement, depending, because there's manic episodes and there's hypomanic episodes. With hypomanic, it's not as severe or as out of control as a manic episode, but they kind of fall on that spectrum of the manic end. And then you have depressive episodes where, of course, you have the downed mood and anything that you know to be depression, pretty much a down mood. Well, when you take the two and they become one in a mixed episode, what can happen is you can experience both manic and depressive episodes at the same time. They can do what's called rapid cycle, which is when they interchange quickly. So I can go from being slightly manic to depressed in anywhere from a day, maybe an hour, depends on the situation and what's happening, or they can be triggered. So where something happens, whether it's something traumatic or even something unideal for the person at the time, you can trigger a manic or a depressive episode. And so kind of like what I was explaining to you earlier, like I was super excited for this interview, and so I could feel myself starting to slip into a manic episode. I'm like, yeah, calm down, just saying, okay, like I did not foresee being this excited, but I guess I was just excited to tell my story, and now to finally have the opportunity to do so uncensored. And so that excitement kind of turned into kind of being fixated on it, and then just you can feel it. It's not anxiety, but it's like this energy in my chest or like in my abdomen. It's like this really intense energy that you can feel, and just trying to relax and calm down and not look or come across as out of control. You feel me? But it's a whirlwind, and sometimes what happens is when you're experiencing a mixed episode, when the two are happening at the same time, that can manifest into being agitated, angry, irritable, impulsivity, grandiosity. Like grandiosity is when you kind of think of yourself higher than what's appropriate. So that's like me walking around thinking, oh, I'm literally a queen. up in here, bow down to me because you should worship at my feet kind of attitude, where in reality I'm a basic citizen in these streets. Like,
how how long ago were you diagnosed with bipolar disorder?
I was officially diagnosed in 2017.
How long were you having episodes or symptoms and no one knew what was going on?
In what I know now, because, okay, well, let me say this. With diagnosis, a lot of times what will happen, or I won't even say a lot of times, I'll say sometimes. Sometimes what happens is you could be experiencing manic episodes or even hypomanic episodes, but you just kind of write it off as a really good day. So you kind of go about life thinking, oh man, I just had a great day. And then it kind of goes unnoticed. When it becomes diagnosable or noticeable is when you have your first depressive episode. And then you're getting evaluated and they say, oh, they asked you this question and that question, and they realize asking you questions, okay, he or she has experienced mania, and then they start asking you more questions, and then they realize, oh, okay, they have a depressive episode. Now they meet the criteria for bipolar spectrum, because it's a spectrum disorder. With me, I feel like a chunk of my life before I was actually diagnosed, I was probably operating in the manic end of the spectrum, but it went unnoticed because, I was like wildly confident in myself. I would have fantastic days. Another thing is, like, you can go a long period of time without sleep and it won't affect you. I could sleep for 3 hours and pop up and have a whole nother day and be cool. And so just probably since I was in middle school, noticing, just from what I know now, probably started in middle school with the manic part of it, and then I was 22 or 23 when I was 22. I was 22? No, I was 22 or 23, one of those two, when I was actually diagnosed, because I had my first depressive episode. And when I went into that depression, that first one was, Jesus, like...
Question.
It was bad.
How did you recognize it as depression?
I didn't. I had no idea what was wrong with me. Initially, okay, so we're probably going to touch on this in more detail later in the conversation, but I guess for this to make sense, I have to say that a traumatic event happened in my life. And then that's when the depressive episode started. I was probably depressed for about 3-4 months. And then, it was, Jesus.
What is 3-4 months? What does 3 to 4 months of depression look like?
You're just, at least for me, it started off with just always thinking about the trauma. Thinking about what happened that triggered it. Thinking about the circumstances around it, because with my particular situation, there was a lot of hostility around the situation and a lot of threats and violence around the situation. And so just constantly being in fear, thinking about the situation. And then it got to a point where I was crying myself to sleep in intervals. I would cry myself to sleep, wake up just to cry myself back to sleep again. And then it started to escalate where I was sleeping all day. I didn't want to get out of bed. It was just nothing worth living for. I just would sleep all day just to wake up to the thoughts of what was going on at the time. And,
so it's like, is stuck a good word? Like, you may have been stuck in this thought pattern of reliving your trauma?
Yeah, stuck in the thought pattern of living the trauma, and then when I was in the depression, I was still being traumatized by members of my family because of the situation that happened.
So they were just re-triggering you.
So it's like, yeah, just re-triggering me. And then it got to a point where I didn't, and I explain it like this because I think it's important to understand the levels of suicidal ideology. So I was experiencing so much emotional pain that I started to long for physical pain to override the emotional pain I was feeling. So I started, because I didn't have a car, I was walking everywhere at the time. And so I started having thoughts of jumping out into the street to get hit by a car. And I would think to myself, okay, if I can just jump out in front of this car and it hit me just right where I don't die, but it lands me in the hospital and I can get a break from this emotional pain and experience some more tangible physical pain. Because I had never experienced emotional pain like this in my whole life. I didn't even know it was called depression. I didn't know what it was. I knew there was a problem. This was not normal for me, and I didn't like it. That's all I knew.
Who did you go to? Who'd you go to for help at that point?
I was honestly pretty alone. My mom, I will say that me and my mom have never really had the best relationship, and she was not helpful as far as like trying to alleviate the trauma I was experiencing at the time, and she didn't even know the full extent of the trauma that I was experiencing at the time. And so, but she knew that I was sad, and so she had recommended that I see a therapist, even though later she ended up mocking me.
Wait. So your mom recommended that you see a therapist. Mm-hmm. That's shocking to me.
She didn't know the extent.
Yeah, that's shocking to me because I think that a lot of, and this is applicable to more black families or minority families or people who are in communities that are just underserved or perhaps undereducated about mental health issues. Growing up, my grandparents, they'd be like, go outside. If I was sad, if I was not doing what I normally do, they'd be like, you bored, take your ass outside, go play, go do something. And that was like what the cure for what might have been depression for me. Looking back, like, I know I was bored, but I knew that they wouldn't let me get bored or stay bored too long. They would always have me doing shit. And even if it was shit I didn't want to do, like I was doing something. So I've always questioned whenever I'm talking to black people about mental health, if they had like a similar experience of in childhood, like grandparents, parents, or even like downplaying what mental health issues look like because they just don't recognize them.
Right. That definitely happened in my family, and I guess after I make this point, I'll kind of get more into that. But I will say that while my mom was the one that suggested I went to see therapy, she then later low-key mocked me for having to see a therapist. So it was kind of like,
yeah,
she just wasn't helpful. So, and then like with my family with mental health, you know, like when I was being evaluated, I'm kind of like jumping around a little bit, but like when I was being evaluated for my mental health, they ask you about family history. Well, and this is where we fall, I hate to put it like this, but this is where we fall short oftentimes as black people. We will say, oh, well, somebody might ask, why Aunt such and such acting like that? Oh, she's just crazy. You know, and it's like, okay, that don't...
Real quick, I questioned that, and I got that response when I was younger. I'm older. My aunt was on medication for bipolar and schizophrenia. Like when she was on her medication, she was my auntie. When she was off her medication, I didn't recognize her. And like still to this day, like I hear from her, she'll call me out the blue sometimes, and she won't sound like how I remember her. But when I don't hear from her and I like see her, let's say I go, well, it's been a while, but like if I go to my dad's house, if he has a gathering and she's there, she's like, yeah, what up, nephew? And we'll talk about old days, like nothing was ever wrong, or like she wasn't doing the things that you would do during a manic episode, because like we've had to go and get her from places sometimes. and she'd end up somewhere doing a thing that she shouldn't be doing in a place that she shouldn't be at, and it's all as a result of her just having not taken her medication. But that dismissed in childhood as being crazy or nuts or out there or batshit, whatever, or retarded. Retarded was probably the biggest one that was used. She grew up and like legit has a mental illness. Like, how would things have shaped out for her life had she been treated on time or when symptoms first presented themselves?
Yeah. And it was hard. It was so hard to go through the family history of mental health. That the only response, and I literally told this to the doctor, they just said that she was crazy. What she had, I don't know. I have an aunt the same way. I now suspect that she's schizophrenic, but do I know that from a family member telling me that? No, it's just from educating myself on mental illness.
Yeah, why do we have to self-educate ourselves on mental health?
You know, I've always, and I don't know if this is correct, but this is what I personally speculate. I've speculated that, and this might sound cliche as well, but it's just my thought. Anyway, when we think back to slavery, and we think back to the condition that we had to be in order to be seen as useful or profitable, we had to be in good shape. You know, if we was not in good shape, then there was consequences to that. If you were born lame, you know what I'm saying, there were consequences to that. And so I think and it's just, again, me speculating, but I think over a course of time, we started to stigmatize ourselves because we've always had to present ourselves in this way of being in good shape, being perfect, being okay. We was not allowed to complain for the longest time. It wasn't legal for us to complain. Oh, master, it sure is hot out here. Can we take a break? That wasn't an option. You know
I wanna offer a little bit of perspective there, because if we are just speculating, I don't remember where I heard this. It had to have been a podcast I was listening to. But during slavery, you have to be inferior or in defense of something like, oh, master, he just stupid. He don't know no better. So like now parents got to beat, their adult looking 14-year-old sons to keep them from being seen by the master as a full grown ass man who doing some shit he ain't got no business doing. So now like I'm seeing where the physical abuse has to happen as a way of instant discipline, and then being able to defend ourselves with, he just don't know no better. He crazy. He ain't right in the head, or he, whatever language it was that we had to work with. And that translates as time developed and we become educated. We can read and see all of these things, like being able to do so in a way that takes advantage of the system or keeps us safe, having to downplay how smart we are so that we're not seen as a threat, having to downplay how talented we are so that we're not taken advantage of. All of these kinds of things, even among each other, even, that you either need to present as perfect or you need to stay under the radar. There's no in between. Hey, this is where we're gonna stop here, and we can pick this up. I wanna do a part 2 with you, so I'm gonna go ahead and pause this here. So I don't necessarily know what this is gonna be called, but stay tuned for part 2 of this episode.